Welcome to All Things Savannah, our weekly program about people, history, stories, and inside information about the hostess city. I'm Frank Morrow, along with Danielle Oak.
Good morning.
Our guest today is Raquelle Blackwood. Raquelle is a holistic music teacher in the Savannah area, also a writer, currently in the process of developing interfaith curriculums for the spiritually curious. We'll get deep into that topic. Welcome to All Things Savannah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we have been told that her nickname or her short version is Rock.
Yes.
So we're gonna call you Rock for the rest of the.
Cool.
I will call you Rock.
And we will rock on.
Oh gosh. And here we go.
I know, starting already.
Yes. So so we usually start off talking about where people are from, just to get perspective. So you're from where originally? Where were you born and raised?
So I was born and raised in Texas, Rockwall, Texas. It's a little city
Rockwall,
outside
Texas?
of Rockwall, yeah.
Rockwall.
No, my name is Raquelle. My sister's name is Rochelle. My sister's middle name is Raquelle, and we're all from Rockwall, Texas.
Oh, gosh.
Do parents have problems with that? I think we both have the same thing.
How about your teachers at school?
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
So good. So fun. Yeah. And hence why I developed nicknames over the years.
Yes.
Rock, Rocky, things like that. But I'm originally from Dallas area and then moved to Nashville when I was 18 for school. Went to Belmont, got my undergrad there in commercial voice performance, and then moved here about a little under 3 years ago.
Okay. So you're such a newbie to Savannah.
Yes.
But and you had never been before you moved, right?
No.
Which I think is so brave.
Yeah.
And
It's a leap.
really cool though. I mean,
Yeah.
very exciting thing to do. Yeah.
That's what you do in your 20s.
That's
Yes.
true. That is what you do in
A
your
lot of people
20s.
won't do it later on.
Yes.
Yeah, so you are a holistic music teacher. We both were sort of surprised by that term. What does that mean?
So it was something that I sort of stumbled across as I was teaching. I realized I had sort of a slightly different style than maybe some of the teachers that I had growing up, some of the teachers I had in school. And this was based upon the fact that all of my students are individual, unique humans with individual, unique needs. And clearly, that's something that all teachers consider, but I think what really started to set me apart was my, and experience is loosely held here, but I had a lot of experience with like yoga and breath work, and also the spiritual element, which is what I'm now writing on and exploring in my writing. And so I've used a lot of this to develop my own practices within teaching. So long story short, essentially I incorporate breathwork techniques in my lessons. I am sort of working with the student, their individual schedule. So like typically teachers will be like, you need to practice 30 minutes a day, every day from the time that you're 5 years old. And I honestly just don't see that working a lot of times. So I like to say that I meet the student where they're at. If you're a 5-year-old, you're going to have very different focus than a 35-year-old.
Yeah,
And so I work with my students to develop unique practice routines. We work with somatic interventions. So like one of my students recently, they were having a hard time with practice. And whereas a lot of teachers would be like, well, you just need to practice more.
Right.
And I was like, okay, where do you feel that? Because the student has ADHD and has presumably been told a lot by the time they're like, 10, 11 years old, that you need to just do it, just do the thing. So I was like, where do you feel it? And he was like, I feel it in my shoulders. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe we relax the shoulders a little bit, roll them up and back every time that you feel like you need to practice and you don't want to. And the next week he came back and he was like, that helped so much.
So
and
it had an immediate effect.
Had an immediate effect. And yeah, so working with the student and their natural tendencies rather than working against it or trying to get them all into the same curriculum, all into the same frame of mind.
I love that.
Individual,
it-
individual
Yeah,
attention.
so, so your training, though, was probably the old school training, or was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you know exactly what that looks like,
Yeah.
exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So just by way of like linking this, my daughters learned how to play piano at around 4 or 5. And it was a similar principle. I mean, we could have gotten them into sort of more of a classical education for piano, for music, but their teacher sounded a lot more like your teacher. And although her perspective was just let's play music. So she got the kids playing music. Didn't matter. It wasn't classical, but
Yeah.
she got them to fall in love with music. And that's the other thing too, is I'm sure you want your students to be in love with music. Don't
Absolutely.
be in love with discipline.
Yeah.
Don't be in love with the framework, right?
Yeah, but we also do work with discipline, and this is sort of again what the writing comes back to is like, so essentially I'm writing a lot about devotion right now, and I've been exploring what that concept means, and at the end of the day, it always comes back to commitment grounded in presence. So when we think of discipline, we think of that rules and structure and things, and like I don't think that rules and structure are necessarily bad. They're really, really helpful for a lot of students, and they come from a place of love for music rather than out of just discipline for discipline's sake. And so we work with developing rules and structure around the students' individual needs.
So when you talked about, you know, your student having ADHD, that is so prevalent these days, and not just with children. A lot of adults are finding out that they've, you know, had this all their lives too. Yeah, exactly. So that's a unique, I think, insight into helping people learn, as we all know these days. But I hadn't really thought about it so much with music.
Yeah.
But those can be learning stumbling blocks that once you take them away, you're able to surmount them.
Oh yeah.
It opens up sort of the floodgates, I think, of creativity. Right?
Absolutely.
Oh, right.
Absolutely.
Because you're not tight, you're
Uh-huh.
not thinking you're failing. Full disclosure, I just have to say this because Raquelle is my piano teacher.
Yes.
So I want to feel very. So I can tell you firsthand, she is patient, caring, and she allows for the students' development, as she said, where they are, whether you are my age, which is considerably older in my 20s. But I've seen the firsthand effects of that, where once you start to relax, you can do amazing things. We had an interesting exchange that I don't think I told you, Danielle, about with Raquelle, my last lesson. She was teaching me a particular piece, and I hit some wrong notes, or my hands were in the wrong place. Shocker, but anyway. And I kind of seized up. You know, I was like, and she said, it's all right, relax. Let's do some breathing, that type of thing, what she's talking about. But then she asked me an interesting question, which was, were you ever reprimanded as a child or earlier in your life for, what was the term, what was that, for boisterousness, I think you said,
Boisterousness,
right?
yes.
And I thought about that about a half second and went, yeah, yeah, I was. So we've talked about this because it's causing me not to be loose enough to do a good job, to really feel it and get into it.
That makes total sense.
It does. It really does. In point of practice, I think it really matters quite a bit. And it's true. You can have both. That's something I didn't know. Discipline as well as passion and letting it flow. So you had voice training, right?
Yes. Yes.
There's breathing involved, diaphragm work, and so on and so
Yes.
forth. How much of that was folded directly into what you're doing now?
So much of it. And like when I look back a lot of times at, I think voice teachers in particular are like sort of the hippies of the music world. Because like, I mean, you're literally working with the voice, which is, I always bring it back to organic material. Like it's different from a piano, which is the separate object from the human being. A piano is going to stay a piano regardless of how you play it. But if you seize up, if you're breathing and you're, say, performing a song and you're really nervous and you go like this, your vocal cords actually literally tense up.
They do.
Right.
And so they get really tight. And that's why might be able to sing really well at home, in the shower, all of those things. But then the second that you get in front of other people, that stress comes in. And so it's particularly really important with voice to approach with a relaxed state.
Interesting.
It is totally interesting, isn't it?
Well, if you're just joining us, you're watching All Things Savannah. We are recording, not live, we're just recording from the Bluff Hotel in their beautiful lounge here called the Two Spades.
Twin
Spades. You know,
Close.
It was close.
Close. Relax. Don't worry
That's
about
right.
it.
We're at 630 East
West.
Is this the first time I've done this? Maybe.
I did write it out.
Oh, I'm not even reading it.
That's okay.
Anyway,
It's all right.
I think you know where we are right now. Anyway, we've got Rock with us, and she's telling us about a lot of different things about music and about being in Savannah and about some of her interest in devotion, which we're going to talk about next, I
That's
think.
really good. Yeah, devotion is such an important topic and also a huge word. That is a powerful, powerful word. Where does that come into your focus? How does that get into your focus, and why is it your focus?
Yeah. So we were talking just a second ago before we started filming that I'm sort of looking to take my business in a little bit of a new direction. I'm still going to be holding the same music lessons and everything, but I found that through line through the process that I really resonated with, that I think a lot of my students really resonated with, was devotion. Rather than just piano itself or voice itself, and music is a wonderful thing, but it's also the devotion that's behind it. And I think this is something that a lot of teachers actually are looking to integrate into their lessons without necessarily having the name for it. How do I get my kids to listen? How do I get my students to listen to me? And you have to find the right motivation, and that is where devotion comes in. So the definition, I'm always going to bring it back to commitment grounded in presence, because when we have commitment that is not grounded in presence, we're all committed to something. We're all committed to our commutes on the way to work. We do that every day, day in and day out, and the more that you give energy to a thing, the stronger that it becomes. There's actually this, you said you wanted to be surprised. So I practice what would be known as witchcraft. And that is not like the broomsticks and everything, but really just like energy work at the end of the day. And there's this idea within that that's called an egregore. And so an egregore is essentially anything that is like a group of people come together and they create a certain energy. So if you think about like a speech, if somebody's giving a speech and then everybody in the crowd gets all worked up because of the speech, that sort of creates an energy. And then when you leave the speech, when you leave that event, you can sort of feel it dissipate out of you, but it carries with you for a time. So when we're talking about devotion, we can think of these things as like mini egregores. So the practice itself is an egregore, and it sounds like a really scary term, but the more that you devote to a practice, the more that you feed it, the more it will feed you in return, the more that it becomes like an act of worship rather than just a simple discipline. And so the way that this connects back to teaching is that, again, you just have to find the right motivation. And everybody comes to music lessons for different reasons. Some people, I've had people come to voice because they had a paralyzed vocal cord and they wanted to see if singing would somehow open that up for them. And then you have people who are on the much more rigorous, disciplined, traditional path, and that is something to be considered as well. So the reason this all comes back to devotion is because everybody is on their own path. And everybody is on their own path with music. Everybody's on their own path on their spiritual journey, on their life journey, whatever it is. And this doesn't even necessarily have to be within a certain faith structure. So it certainly can. But the reason that I like to think of devotion as a thing in and of itself is because it doesn't require that structure. And you can practice devotion, and you do practice devotion even if you're an atheist or an agnostic person. So devotion is simply the things that we commit ourselves to. And these can be wildly powerful, because if we are devoting ourselves without realizing it, without that presence, we're sort of just going through the motions, and we're not living very intentionally.
So does that become its own source? You're saying it's an energy.
Yeah.
So it sort of produces its own result, which you recognize and continue to feed off of? Is that,
Yeah.
in other words, not doing it mindlessly, doing it focused?
Uh-huh.
That this is what you're
Yeah.
trying to do and feeling that result.
And that's why it requires presence, because if you don't have that presence and you're committing yourself to it, say because your parents wanted you to do music, which is something I see a lot.
Yeah.
If that is the case, then that will develop into resentment, and that carries an energy in and of itself, and it can affect things far outside of the musical practice. It can affect your relationship with your parents. It can affect your relationship to schoolwork of all kinds, and discipline itself. And that's why we have such a negative connotation with discipline, because it's so much of it is not grounded in presence.
Right. Okay, just an offshoot. You said something that really piqued my interest.
Yeah.
Vocal cords.
Vocal
so
cords.
you have had somebody who's come to you with paralyzed vocal cords, or one? Okay, so I know this is different than the devotion thing, but
No,
I'm
please
really,
do,
really
yeah.
curious, because this is a physical challenge that you were able to undertake with this person. How did that go?
So we only actually studied together for a couple of months or so. We were able to make a little bit of progress, but it required a much different lesson structure. Our goals were very different than most vocal lesson goals. And in the end, I think she ended up leaving for her own personal reasons. It might have been too much of an undertaking. It might have been, I don't know. That was when I was working somewhere else, and they were having those conversations with the student rather than me directly.
Okay.
So I wasn't able to understand like why we weren't in lessons anymore, but we were able to make a little bit of progress during our time together.
We had another guest named David, and I'm blanking out on David's last name. Neshes, yes. A music person as well.
Yeah.
And I think he would be totally on board with what you're talking about,
I agree
don't you
with
think?
you, yes.
And he began to express to us just how intrinsic music is to everything that we are as human beings.
That's a great point.
And what you're saying to me is resonating completely. And I just think, just opening up people to the idea of this is just not about learning the keyboard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is much bigger.
Uh-huh.
This is a physical thing, and even more so, as you say, when
Yeah.
you're doing vocal music. That is fascinating.
You find when you interview people in music, and we know people close to us and friends, that it's so deep. It's if it's really because it becomes, even in David's case, a lifelong. It may morph into certain things in different parts of his career, but it's always there.
Yeah.
It's always part of you, and I think that's the point. It's durable. It's just it's within
Durable,
you,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it seems that way with you. It seems
Yeah.
like music is such an important part of your life. Again, how does that happen for you, that music is maybe at the center of your life? I'm not sure how you would describe it, but it's interesting to think about it.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just a skill, obviously.
Yeah, or a
Absolutely.
profession,
Yeah.
for that matter.
So I think this goes back to why I do what I do. And so speaking on what you're talking about with music being a lot more than a lot of times what we give it credit for, one of the things I heard recently was that we might have developed the skill for music before language, that it eventually morphed into language. So essentially when you speak, you're creating music each time. And when you're just like beating a rock with a stick. That's drums, you know, and it's percussion. And they've found, I think the specific study was with babies, and they were pre-social. So this was like 3-month-old babies. When they did certain kinds of music, they would move specific limbs. So like one specific kind of music would trigger like left arm or something.
Wow.
One specific kind of music, right leg. Ooh.
Yeah,
exactly. And this goes really deeply into our evolutionary programming, if you will, and eventually turned into our capacity for language. So it's deeply, deeply embedded within us.
Love that.
And that's why, I never had the privilege of being a part of this program, but at my school, they had a music therapy program, and they worked with a lot of people with Alzheimer's. They worked with particularly a lot of students with autism, different neurodivergence. And there are ways in which, because music is such a almost primordial part of our framework, there's ways that you can work with people with music that language sometimes can't really connect to. And so that's why I'm really passionate about what I do, because I think everybody needs to have access to it in whatever way that they can have access to it.
I love that. Yeah,
So good.
I totally agree. Well, you are watching All Things Savannah, and we have Rock here sharing about music and some of her ideas about how she's learned music and what she's doing with it now. And I think one of the questions we want to follow up on is, you are 26 years old.
Yes.
And you're living in Savannah. You've
Yes.
chosen to live here. You're probably our youngest guest.
I think
far.
so. Yeah. Perfect.
And I think demographically speaking, so many of the young people here in the city are students. Yet you are the opposite. You're teaching. So how do you feel about Savannah? Like, what,
love
as a young
Savannah.
person, do you
Yeah.
see yourself here long term?
I'd say I do. Yeah. Hopefully. You know, you never know how life's going to go. But I sort of ended up here on a whim, and I ended up really enjoying it. And part of the reason that I came here was because I saw a lot more career development than I did in Nashville. Nashville is, you know, lovely city, but it's highly, highly saturated. And so when I was talking with my partner about this, though, he was saying that this Savannah reminds him a lot of Nashville 10 years ago.
Oh.
And so it's on the up and up, and I think it's definitely in the process of being developed. And so being a part of that early stage of development feels really cool and really interesting.
So there are community elements of Savannah that appeal to everybody. There's a tightness, a closer knit feel here. Is that part of what you like? Is that something that
Absolutely.
appeals to you?
Absolutely. I think in some of your larger cities, we do miss out a lot on community aspects because everything is so spread out. There's so many people. It's really easy to get lost in it all. And also, I mean, it's a very image-driven city, if you will. You know, you meet people and it's like, what's your Instagram? And you see how many followers people have, and that's like a whole part of it. And so what really appealed to me about Savannah is that it just has a much different energy. It has a much different community aspect. And I definitely felt like I was going to thrive here much better.
So we would call you a young professional
Yes.
in the field,
Yeah.
but you're creative as well. Have you found a community of like-minded people your age here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So I recently went to a writing group at the Stax bookstore. That was really cool. That's a new bookstore. They're doing lots of really great stuff. I'm a part of a book club there as well. There is the DSA meetings that happen, I think, on the first Thursday of every month.
Okay, DSA.
No, I don't know that either.
The Democratic Socialists of America.
Okay.
So they have a group that's going, and so they're involved with political action, things like that. And what else? I mean, also the witchcraft community is I like to compare this place to New Orleans. It has a very similar
It's been done. Yeah, that's a good comparison.
a very similar vibe, if you will. And I mean, it's outside of witchcraft, just spirituality in general. And it's a very open town, I would say. Even with, I think, Asbury Memorial Church, they're doing some really, really great stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I find that everywhere that I go in the city is very open and welcoming, regardless of what kind of place it is. If it's a church or anything like that, it's very open and welcoming.
It is a consistent theme.
Yes.
Where do you see 2024 taking you? You've given us a hint at sort of some of the things you're working on.
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share with us as we move through?
Sure. So I have been writing a lot more lately. I have actually finished the first part of like you were saying at the beginning, it's an interfaith curriculum, if you will. I'm putting together workshops, particularly for the tarot. So tarot is a divination practice, and some would call it fortune telling. I use it in a very different way. The tarot cards are essentially archetypes, and archetypes carry their own energy. So when I tell you about Goldilocks and the Three Bears, that automatically conjures an image and a moral story. And when we think of the tarot cards, we have a figure like the Empress, and that carries with it its own energy and moral story. And you have connotations that are linked there. And so the project I'm working on is an interfaith devotional based on the tarot cards as archetypes. So anybody, again, can work with these archetypes. You can be agnostic, atheist, Jewish. Anybody can work with these archetypes because they're universal. And it is sort of set up, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Jesus Calling or any of those kinds of devotionals. So they take like a verse, and then you work with the verse, and then it has some journal prompts. And so the devotional is set up that way, where we take a tarot card, I write an essay on it, sort of exploring the themes of it, a little bit educational, a little bit more philosophical, and then there's some questions at the end that ask you to see what kinds of ways does the Empress, for example, show up in your own life. When we look at the Empress, she is about receiving, and she's open to receiving love and care, and she uses it to regenerate into new life. And so when we work with the Empress, we can think, where am I regenerating new life? What wants to come through? What wants to be born right now? And how can I work with this? And so that's the project that I foresee 2024.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see
Going
more of
into.
that,
Yes.
hopefully. We'll see some of that come to
Definitely.
light. That would be great. They're great prompts. It's going to keep you busy. I don't know where you find the time, especially with some of your students.
Every morning.
I
Yeah,
see.
every morning.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for being with
Yeah.
us today.
So
Thank
good
you
to
so much
have
for
you.
having me.
Yes.
Awesome. We are going to do this again next week.
Yes.
We will be talking to another person who you'll find very fascinating, an exchange student from Serbia. This is an amazing interview, and I think you're going to love it, and it'll enlighten us about some of the things we've been talking about, community, but on a global scale.
Right, and it will tie back into Savannah, don't you worry.
Absolutely.
It's a little outside of our typical thing that we usually
Yeah.
do, but this is an opportunity we just didn't want to pass by.
Absolutely.
So we do want to thank our tech team today, Riley, Talia, and Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And we will
Awesome.
be back next time around, another deep dive into the people and the history and the stories of Savannah, all things Savannah. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.